Welcome back to a brand new edition of Views from the Booth. I am your host, Reed Becker, and joining me today, again, you have Brett Chaves, contributor to Fanside.com, and Ben Pope, who has his own podcast, First and Goal, Dean Gridiron Talk. So we're going to today, let's just start off recapping up in Buffalo from the NFL wildcard what weekend. The Buffalo Bills beating Indianapolis 27-24. So this game for me, first of all, was much closer than I had expected it to be, honest, personally. On Indianapolis' side, Frank Reich, to me, left a lot of points out there by going for it specifically right before halftime. I believe it was 4th and goal. It was only 14-10, I believe. Yeah, 14-10. They were 10-7, and then they went into halftime 14-10. So that specifically stuck out to me. But so that's on Indianapolis side, and which I'll let you guys respond to. And then one other thing is, we'll start with that.
Yeah. So for me, Indianapolis, like you said, left a lot to leave. Rodrigo Blankenship missing that field goal was big, very big at that point in the game. The biggest thing to me that stuck out, even though they lost, I think it's consensus that the Indianapolis running game has grown stronger and stronger as the season has progressed and developed. Jonathan Taylor looks like he's going to be very serious next season, and Nyheim Hines, a very good compliment. So even though they lost, and there are some coaching and game management issues that still need to be addressed within his offense and defense, I think Frank Reich should be very excited with what his running game has to be showing next season, because I was very impressed with what Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines did.
Yeah, I think there's an overarching narrative that we can kind of look over, not only for this game, but for the wildcard weekend in general. For the most part, I would kind of exclude the Tampa Bay-Washington game, as that was kind of a unique situation in its own with Taylor Heineke starting. But for pretty much every other game, it was the team that made the most mistakes ended up losing. Like, there's no way to go around that. And Indianapolis did make some crucial mistakes. Reed touched upon the 4th and 2 right before the second quarter ended. Frank Reich, I don't think he made two terrible calls. I think personally, from a fan's perspective, I respect someone going for it right before the end of half, going for 4th downs and everything, just trying to get some points up on the board before halftime. And Phillip Rivers is still the quarterback there. He is not the greatest after halftime. I think Indianapolis has their strengths before halftime, kind of going off the playbook and everything. But yeah, I think just looking back on the game in general, Buffalo was the better team. The fact that Indianapolis was in it as much as they were is a credit to both coaching on Indianapolis' side and just the pure talent that they have on their overall roster. Phillip Rivers did pretty decent for what we were expecting of him. Just not even in this game, but just in general over the entire season. It's going to be up to Indy coaching and the GM and everything, whether he comes back. And we know that Rivers has said that if he is going to be coming back in the NFL, it's going to be either with the Colts or not at all. So that's going to be an interesting decision there. But a lot left to be desired for the Colts. And on the Buffalo side, I think we're going to touch upon that a little bit later. But let's hear what Reed has to say.
Well, so let's just stay with the Phillip Rivers point then. So if he comes back, saying that it's Indianapolis or bust. Now, looking at it, there's other things that you have to consider, which we'll get into later. But because now it sounds like Carson Wentz might be staying in Philly, which we'll get to a little later, and then Deshaun Watson situation. If you're Indianapolis, do you stay with Phillip Rivers, or do you go a different route? Because if Deshaun Watson becomes available, he has a big contract. I don't know what the cap ramifications could be, but if someone becomes available like that, I don't see Phillip Rivers staying. I think Indianapolis should go in a different route, but.
Brett, you're muted.
You're muted.
Gotcha. To me, as I was saying, if Phillip Rivers were to stay in Indianapolis, the one route that I would see him being is a bridge quarterback, because at this point in his career, he's not really good long-term anymore. So if he does want to stay, Indianapolis should consider signing him to like a 1-year smaller deal than what he had this year and drafting a quarterback in the first round. So that way there's a potential bridge there. But like Reed said, I don't see Phillip Rivers staying much longer. I think he retires after the season and
I agree.
Indianapolis goes another route.
I guess it kind of depends on the route that they do want to take, like Brett mentioned. I don't really see them trading up or drafting a quarterback this year. I don't think that's the route they go. I think that it's a potential for the future and everything, but I know that they just drafted a quarterback on this year's draft. The name is just passing over my head, so I can't remember him off the top of my head, but where they are right now, I do think that their best option is either signing or trading for a veteran quarterback off the market, whether that's like a Matthew Stafford type or a Carson Wentz if he decides to, or if he's trying to push a trade out there. I think those two are pretty obvious ones, Sam Darnold being another one if Justin Fields is the direction that the Jets want to go in. But yeah, I think the Colts should be looking for a veteran quarterback because they are in kind of a win now mode. I don't think waiting for a rookie quarterback to kind of develop over the next couple of years is the way that they should go. But yeah, I mentioned Matt Stafford name a lot because I think where Detroit is right now, they have no clear direction. They are in a clear direction. They need to rebuild. They need to build up some more picks, and Matthew Stafford is another way of doing that. I don't see him staying in Detroit past
Matt
this
Ryan's
season.
another name.
Matt Ryan is another name. I think with the direction that Atlanta is trying to do, if they are able to grab, I know they've been heavily in talks with Joe Brady as taking over as their head coach. I think they would keep Matt Ryan in that scenario. And if they're able to draft Justin Fields, kind of do a similar situation where similar to Patrick Mahomes, I guess, where Smith was the quarterback for a year and then they traded him and brought in Mahomes as a starter. That would kind of be a similar situation I would see because I think Atlanta and Justin Fields makes too much sense to pass up on. But for Indianapolis, I think Matt Stafford is a really good candidate that's really out there open. Like I mentioned, Wentz and Darnold are a couple other options.
Now let's just finish up on this specific game with Buffalo, which I'll cover more later on. But what I saw from Buffalo, what concerns me about them is their defense. Really, it was both teams' defenses were atrocious. But specifically with Buffalo, I mean, they went up a lot, and then it was their defense that just let Indianapolis come back into it because they couldn't stop any run.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to keep in mind this defense still pretty young. A lot of young guys out there.
Right,
Tre'Davious White.
This is going to be the second best team in the AFC. I mean, your defense, you're going to get destroyed by Baltimore next week.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's very possible that Baltimore gives them a very tough time. But to me, in this game, Buffalo's defense is good, but you also have to remember they're young, and some of them haven't even had any playoff experience yet. I mean, Ed Oliver, I believe this was his first playoff game, if I'm not mistaken. He's supposed to be the best defensive lineman on that whole defense right now. So to me, they're young and they have a lot of potential, but there's still flaws that need to be fixed. And I think that's one of the primary reasons why you saw Indianapolis take advantage of some of those flaws.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned with Buffalo's defense. I think behind Baltimore, they are clearly the second best defense, at least on the AFC side of things. I think Kansas City, especially in the second half of the year, left a lot to be desired on both sides of the ball. And I don't know about the Browns have been shaky. They're still dealing with some COVID issues. So I'm not too worried about Buffalo's defense compared to their opposition, as even in the NFC. Aside from the Rams, none of the NFC teams left really have a dominant defense. You could say the Saints, but they've been kind of a little bit wishy-washy of like how high their peak is. But I think Buffalo's biggest concern is actually their lack of a run game. So they just lost Zach Moss on Sunday to an ankle injury, and they just signed Devontae Freeman from the Giants on a practice squad contract. Right now, their only running back on the roster is Devin Singletary, and he is more of a scat back. He's very similar to a James White, Nyheim Hines type, where he is specifically used for catching passes out of the backfield. That's the reason they drafted Zach Moss. They didn't like him as a running back. And the biggest threat on Sunday from the running game was Josh Allen on the Buffalo side. He scored a rushing touchdown, but they've been using him a lot like that recently. Otherwise, I don't really have – oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for Josh Allen's sake, they have to they have to teach him how to slide. If you have to get maybe someone from the Blue Jays to cross the board to teach him how to slide, because otherwise he's going to get hurt, and then he's basically he's just going full speed as a running back, which is for a quarterback too dangerous. If he gets hurt, they're done.
Yeah, but I think Josh Allen I think he's matured in all types of his game, especially this year. Not only just his passing, but he's been more reserved with his runs, more specifically on the goal line. This is his third straight year with 8 rushing touchdowns, but that's pretty much how Sean McDermott likes to use him on the goal line. They're not really like the Titans, where if they're on like the 1 yard, they like to pass it a lot. Buffalo strictly running it with Josh Allen, but no issues with Josh Allen. The pick early, not really his mistake, and he was able to easily recover from that, throwing for over 320 yards, 2 touchdowns. Stephon Diggs and a healthy John Brown and Gabriel Davis, they have loads of weapons up there. So really, other than the run game, I don't really have many concerns for Buffalo. I think their defense will be able to hold up against teams like Baltimore and Kansas City, which they're facing Baltimore this week. This is going to be an interesting matchup, to say the least. Most of these matchups are, but yeah, I haven't lost too much concern from Buffalo. If anything, I got a little bit more respect for Indy from the game.
All right, we'll get to the Baltimore-Buffalo game a little later, but just as a side note, Buffalo snaps are 0-6 postseason skid and their first win in the playoffs since December 30th of 1995 versus the Miami Dolphins. But let's transition to the next game after that. Was one of the big upsets of the weekend. The LA Rams going into Seattle and beating the Seahawks 30-20. For this game, it was really the Rams defense that just shut Russell Wilson and the Seahawks down. You have DJ Metcalf throwing a fit on the sideline, DK Metcalf. And then you have, for the Rams offensive side of the ball, you have Jared Goff had to come back in because of John Wolford getting hit to the head. So to me, for the Rams, it was obviously just their defense that kept them in this game. Their offense, that quarterback position is still concerning to me. I mean, Jared Goff comes in and did pretty bad. I mean, 9 for 19 and only 155 yards. I mean, I wasn't so impressed with that. I think that's going to be my biggest question with them going forward still.
To me, I was really impressed with this Rams defense. I mean, this is just another big point showing why specifically Aaron Donald should be Defensive Player of the Year once again. Another huge performance out of him. I really like the kid Darius Johnson, too, that they have in their secondary to pair with Jalen Ramsey. I wasn't expecting a lot of big things from him in the beginning of this season, but this game specifically showed to me that he has a lot of potential, and I think the Rams found a great selection in him. So I'm really impressed with what their secondary is beginning to be. As far as the offensive side, I really think they need to start to look at what's Jared Goff's long-term possibilities, because like you said, Reed, from last game, between him and Wolford, I didn't see that great of solid quarterback play. They need to look at, what's their long-term consideration and maybe even trade for a quarterback if it's potential, look at the draft. But so like Indianapolis, I think they're in a win-now situation where they need that veteran quarterback to come in and create solid quarterback play.
Yeah, kind of talking from the Rams' perspective, I think Brett covered pretty much what I wanted to talk about on the defensive side, but one big thing that I took away from this is Sean McVay is a playoff quality head coach. He came into a situation where I know Seattle had a lot of things going on their side, which was kind of up in the air, especially coming off of the rough second half of the season that they had, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And I think we kind of mentioned that on last week's pod as well. But I will say that Sean McVay, with John Wolford and a 30% Jared Goff, they said he was at like 30% health with his thumb injury. Sean McVay was able to bring out the best of his players, and we're going to talk a similar situation with the Browns as well later on. But I think Sean McVay just showed to me a little bit that he is a top 5 at the very least head coach in the game, and he can bring the most out of his players in the playoffs. Just to touch on Cam Akers as well, I think I know they used Malcolm Brown a lot in the second half of the game, pretty much just because they were ahead by a decent margin and the Seahawks weren't making too much head on offensive side of things, but 173 scrimmage yards for Cam Akers in this game. He had the big game against the Patriots as well, week 12. He looks to be similar to Jonathan Taylor. This rookie class of both running backs and wide receivers looks to be very impressive for the years to come.
And then just quickly going back to the Rams defense for a second, do we know, because we know that Aaron Donald left the game and missed most of the second half with his rib injury. I don't think, have the Rams said anything yet? I don't know about for their status for their game in Green Bay for him yet.
So Jared Goff is expected to be the starter. I know that Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp are both questionable right now. Cooper Kupp also suffered, I believe it was a knee injury late in the third quarter or fourth quarter. He didn't play too many snaps after that. They really focused on Robert Woods and Josh Reynolds. But Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald, I think they're both projected to play. I don't know if it's a certainty right now. I think it's going to be more so of closer to a game time decision just for strategic reasons.
And then let's just quickly touch on the Seattle side of this. First of all, their defense, I think, which has been a question all year, all season, really, I mean, to me, it was awful. I mean, was a disappointment, to say the least. You had Jamal Adams as a big acquisition in a trade with the Jets, and then find out later he's going to have to need surgery anyway. But I was disappointed with Seattle's defense, which we knew was a concern this whole season anyway. But
yeah, to me, this defense needs some work. To me, I think the most specific position they need to address here is cornerback. Very slim pickings on the cornerback side. I think safety, they're all set. Jamal Adams, needs to get healthy again, and they need to make sure, he's good on all sides. Quadre Diggs, same thing. Pro Bowl safety, I think they're all set there. But cornerback needs to be addressed. Your slim pickings, there's not much to deal with there. So if I'm Seattle, they need to look into the draft and seriously consider taking a cornerback with their first-round selection. As far as play calling goes, was not impressed at all with Pete Carroll. It was pretty easy to tell as the season progressed that Pete Carroll wasn't really doing the best play calling towards the end of the season and going into the playoffs. I was not impressed with the offensive play calling at all, either between his coordinators and himself. To me, it almost looked like Russell Wilson couldn't do much with the ball. He looked very well with Tyler Lockett, I will admit that. But with DK Metcalf, it almost looked like there was some miscommunication there between the two. I don't know what was going on. Run game, same thing. Very mediocre play. Was not too impressed at all. But if I'm Seattle, they need to take a look at their defense and secondary to help it with the cornerback. And then offense, they need to address that play calling issue and make sure that every part of the offense is on all cylinders, because there's definitely something that's not clicking there.
Yeah, just to touch on Jamal Adams quick. So he is getting surgery on one of his shoulders to fix a torn labrum. Also, he had some sort of finger surgery as well. There was something up with, I believe, one of his index fingers there. So those are two kind of big injuries that have been lingering over the past few weeks for Jamal Adams. But just to talk about the offense just a little bit, Russell Wilson, this is the second straight year that he has pretty much completely fallen apart in the second half after starting off as MVP favorite in the first half, similar to what happened with him and Lamar last year. Lamar just kept going, and Russell Wilson just was a continuing downfall. And I don't know what to say. Like, him and Pete Carroll have a pretty good resume in the playoffs, but it continues to show that they, aside from that one Super Bowl that they did go to, or two, I should say, they haven't really been able to make it back to the big dance in quite a long time. I don't know if it's the supporting cast, but we have to look more at Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll and kind of evaluate whether this is more their fault rather than the supporting cast around them. I know we've said coming into last year that this was kind of, or at least at the beginning of this year, that this was kind of Russell Wilson's team and that he was kind of carrying the team. And yes, this was true, but the defense picked it up a lot in the second half of the season, carrying kind of the offense. And in this playoff game, the defense kind of gave up on him because Russell Wilson was not giving them a chance to succeed on the offensive side of the ball. I understand that they were playing one of the best defenses, probably the best defense in the Los Angeles Rams and everything, but they didn't have Aaron Donald most of the fourth quarter. There was a chance that they were able to get back in this game, but it looked kind of just like everyone gave up, and not really a good look for the Seahawks. They were a team that I thought if they were able to fix stuff on the offensive side of things, maybe they could take on the Packers, which is the clear NFC favorite in my eyes. But I don't know. It's a tough situation up in Seattle.
Yeah, that was a big downfall second half of the season for Russell Wilson, to say the least. He was probably the clear favorite up there in MVP voting and just went straight down. Seahawks, this is their first home playoff loss since 2005 versus the St. Louis Rams at that time. But let's move along, because Saturday night's game in the nation's capital, so Bucks beating Washington 31-23. For Tampa Bay, I mean, we know how dominant the defense is. Not the defense. We'll get to that after this. But the offense is. Playoff Brady shows up. Their defense, though, it was awful. So this quarterback, Taylor Heinicke, I believe it was only his second game, if I'm not mistaken, that he played. And they made him look like Joe Montana. Like it was pretty pathetic on their defense's part, to a guy that plays only their second game, and you're getting, like, compared to possibly being able to go into New Orleans to beat Drew Brees or go further into the playoffs. I was very disappointed in Tampa's defense.
I was also disappointed, Reed. Bucks need to really look at, like, finishing the game. You know, when they have a big lead, they pretty much let Washington linger around the entire game. And like you said, they made Taylor Heinicke look a lot better than what he potentially is. It's just cut and dry for me. Tampa Bay needs to fix a lot of things, and letting teams linger around in games is probably the biggest thing that they need to address, because right now that's a big problem.
I feel so Taylor Heinicke, not that we were expecting anything great out of him, but I think we should give him and at least the Washington coaching staff a little bit of credit. I think Ron Rivera did like a pretty good job of prepping him for this game and everything. Not too bad. Over 300 passing yards. He a touchdown on the ground and through the air, and a pick and everything. But yeah, I don't know. Tampa was a team that I think after their second loss to the Saints, I never really took them seriously throughout the rest of the regular season. I know they had a really hot 3-game stretch, 2 games against the Falcons, and then 1 game against the Lions that they completely dominated on offense. And their defense was a little shaky against the Falcons, but that's a good offense on their side. And they completely dominated the Lions in both senses of the game. But I don't know. I still think I hold over concerns about the relationship of Bruce Arians and Tom Brady. Not more so the relationship, I guess, but the way that they're utilizing the offense. It's worked much better against these weaker teams, and they showed up against a football team. But I think just in general, I don't know how they're going to show up. Third time against the Saints, they were completely and utterly dominated the second time. The first time it was a much closer game, but it was Tom Brady's first time playing against New Orleans, playing with Bruce Arians as his head coach. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup. But yeah, I don't know. Tampa Bay secondary is something to be concerned about. I'm not sure if it's going to be too much of a concern against this Saints team, where Drew Brees hasn't been throwing the ball too deep down the field. I know that Michael Thomas is close to 100% now, but it's going to be a thing that we'll have to see on Sunday.
We'll get to that later for New Orleans, Tampa, but let's and then quickly for Washington, Heinicke. So obviously you have to give him credit. I mean, the way he was he was very mobile, and some of the throws he made were unbelievable. But looking at it on Washington's side, we know there's a question mark with Alex Smith going forward at the quarterback position, if he's going to retire, who's 36 at this point, and at this point is pretty fragile once he goes out of the pocket. So, I mean, if you're Washington, this is kind of a tough one. Do you have Alex Smith Do you get rid of him? Do you go? Because I mean, Heineke. First of all, you can't go off one game for Heineke. You can't do that. But just watching from Alex Smith's when he played, he did look a little average or fragile, you could say, outside the pocket. So I guess if you're Washington, how do you approach this? Because I think it would be premature to just go with Heineke off this one game, though.
I agree. They're kind of in a really tough situation right now. They're at a spot in the draft where they can't really draft a quarterback that's a huge name off the board. If they even want to consider drafting a quarterback, it'd be in the lower part of the class, someone like Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Kyle Trask, someone at the back end. If I'm Alex Smith and I'm smart, I would retire right now on my own terms, because right now his situation with his leg and seeing how he's fragile, getting out of the pocket and just moving around, he's putting himself at even more risk to do even more damage to himself. So if I'm smart, I would retire right now. But just looking at Washington's situation, I'd personally keep Heineke, not as a starter, but as potentially a backup, because you've seen that he has some bright spots, not potentially starter material, but he has those bright spots. But if I'm Washington, I consider draft, whether it's moving up and using some of that sort of cap space to maneuver around, or it's potentially drafting someone at the back end, but they need someone who can develop and create some solid play.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like if Alex Smith is willing to come back, I think he would be a good option as kind of a bridge quarterback, similar to what I mentioned with Indianapolis before. I do think that going with a first-round quarterback is the way to go. I think that maybe this is just because it was the big game, but against Ohio State, Mac Jones looked pretty solid. Trey Lance has shown flashes of potentially being that starting quarterback that Washington is looking for. Those are two names that are pretty solid, and at least in my estimation. I know that we always want to look at Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, but you kind of want to take the good with the bad here and try not to compare up to where the talent is, but just kind of compare on where we project these guys to go. And I think these two could both be solid starting quarterbacks in the league and everything. I do think, similar to what I mentioned with Indy, though, I think trading for or acquiring a veteran quarterback, at least for a stopgap year, would be the way to go. I think of names of Cam Newton would be a possibility. Again, I'm going to bring up Matthew Stafford. I think for any of these teams that are kind of in a transitional mode of that they think they can contend, but they're not entirely sure if they want to completely go for it this year, I think Matt Stafford is a perfect candidate for most of these teams if they have the cap space, which Washington does. Another name I did bring up was Cam Newton. I think Cam would be, I think he would be an interesting fit in Washington. I don't know if he'd be a perfect fit, but he would be another one of those bridge year quarterbacks. But Washington is built to kind of succeed right now. I think their defensive line is very impressive with Chase Young and Montez Sweat kind of leading that up. They have pretty good offensive weapons with Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick being a similar player, another scat back. Running back, honestly very similar to Indianapolis. They have a lot of similarities. And Ron Rivera showed that he put up close to a Coach of the Year performance this year. I don't know if he's going to win it, but he did put up a quality performance there. But I don't think Washington is too far away from, especially in this division, from being a contender once again.
Yeah, and for Ron Rivera, you have to consider having had cancer earlier in the year and then was able to come back and then lead this team to the NFC East title or division. But let's next game on to Sunday though. Baltimore and Tennessee. So Ravens beat Tennessee 20-13. So obviously the big storyline is Lamar Jackson gets his first playoff win. First of all, the Baltimore's defense though just completely shut down Derrick Henry, and after that, Tennessee's offense was kind of lost, I would say. The big question the big controversy in this game, honestly, was the decision by Mike Vrabel with 10 minutes left to punt at Baltimore's 40-yard line. Now, what I'll say about this is, if I'm not mistaken, because Baltimore wound up just kicking a field goal after, and Tennessee wound up getting the ball out late in the game to try to come back. So I'm not When I first saw that, I didn't think it was as bad as people were making it out to see it to punt because you still had 10 minutes left in that game. And there were, by the way, they still had a bunch of their timeouts. And by the way, yeah, they still got the ball late in that game to try to come back. Their offense just couldn't do anything. But I don't think Mike Vrabel's decision was as bad as people were making it out to be. You're muted.
Second time, sorry. If we just look at Tennessee as a whole here, like Reed said, Derrick Henry pretty much runs this offense right now. Very ground heavy, very run and go type of style. And I think when you take out Derrick Henry from the equation, they're almost lost, like you said. We just take a look at the receiving stats. Like I said in our last podcast, I pretty much expected that the Ravens secondary was going to give Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith a tough time. Corey Davis, 2 catches for 0 yards. A.J. Brown probably had the most successful day, 6 catches for 83 yards, a pretty solid day for him. Jonnu Smith, pretty much irrelevant on the receiving board. But this Ravens secondary gave Ryan Tannehill and his receivers a tough time, which was very much expected. And when you take Derrick Henry out of the equation too, there's not much Tennessee can do here on the offensive side of the ball. And as far as the punt goes, I don't know. I mean, they still had a lot of their timeouts. Logistically, if you want to rely on your defense to make that stop, yeah, then they punt the ball. I mean, if you want to rely on your defense that much and you think that they can do it, then absolutely punt the ball. But seeing what Tennessee had on their slate at that point in time, they didn't really have that much potential to make the stop to begin with. I mean, the line was having a tough time keeping Lamar Jackson contained to begin with. And to me, I really don't know what Tennessee was thinking at that point in time, but it could have gone either way.
Yeah, kind of just to address the fourth and 2 situation first. I would have said coming into this game, before this game even happened, if you were telling me the Tennessee Titans were on the 4th and 2 and they had a chance to score a touchdown and take or tie or take the lead, I'd 100% do it. I trust Derrick Henry. I trust Mike Vrabel in that offense and everything. But the way that the defense was playing, they were playing one of their best games defensively. I know 20 points is like you wouldn't think too much of it, but this Tennessee defense has been really bad this year. They put up one of their best performances against a really good offense in Lamar Jackson in that running game. Even Marquise Hollywood-Brown and Mark Andrews had really good receiving games. But just to talk about Tennessee, this game comes down to 2 players, and it's Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. I don't think there's any way around it. Derrick Henry, 18 for 40, 18 attempts for 40 yards. Probably his worst game of the year. I don't know if that's correct, statistically correct, but just off the top of my head, I think that's his worst game of the year. And then Ryan Tannehill, just over 170 passing yards with a pick. The pick right at the end of the game to Marcus Peters. I think that was just a tempo game where they were just trying to rush out of the first down and everything. I don't really blame Tannehill on that. I think that was just a rush play call. But there was nothing really on the Tennessee offensive side of things that really after the beginning of the second quarter, they showed little to any life on the offensive side of things. Baltimore was dominating them, both on the pass defense and on the rush defense. But I don't know. It's Tennessee's inconsistencies on offense. I know we like to talk about their defense, and that was the biggest concern coming into this game, but they were really inconsistent on offense as well. I know they were a top 3 offensive team and everything, but they were carried by a lot of 40-point performances against some weak teams like Tennessee, or against Tennessee. This was Tennessee against Houston and Jacksonville, namely one of the 2. But I don't know. It's a really tough situation for Tennessee. They had some really high expectations coming into both this year and the playoffs, and it's a tough loss for them. I think that they need to really take a look back and really hone down and identify what they want to do as an identity, both on the offensive side of things and defense. I think they need to look for some protection for Ryan Tannehill on the O-line and everything. And if they're not able to re-sign Corey Davis, look for a really good second option on the wide receiver core, because A.J. Brown is a top 10 wide receiver in the game. And you guys, he showed it on Sunday. This kid is so talented. He's one of the best players yards after catch in the game. You got to give Tannehill another option, because Brown has been injured pretty much this entire season with an ankle injury and a knee injury as well. But he gritted it out. He played really well. So if they're able to re-sign Davis, get some additional protection for Tannehill on the O-line, and just get some defensive pieces, that is really important for Tennessee, to get some defensive pieces. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot left on the table for Tennessee right now, and a really disappointing loss, even though it was against a pretty good team in the Ravens.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised, to say the least, that they kept Derrick Henry to the minimal yardage that he had, because I was expecting Tennessee to win this game. But the other thing, though, to mention about this game, though, is right at the end, after the game-clinching interception by Baltimore, they run out to midfield to start dancing on their logo. Now, it's important to mention, as Ben just waves it away, but it's important to mention that the last time they met up in Baltimore, the Titans did the exact same thing to them. And that was pregame, I'm pretty sure. So, well, first of all, let me just say this. Tennessee should have no complaints about that, because they did the exact same thing to them when they were playing each other in Baltimore. The other thing is, if you notice, right when the game ended, Lamar Jackson and the entire offense just ran out into the tunnel and left. And Lamar Jackson, the only reason he came back out was because someone had to tell him to come back out for an interview. If you're talking about sportsmanship these days, I mean, it feels like there's minimal to none, if any, at all anymore. But like, I don't know, for the whole offense just to run out, they probably knew that Tennessee was probably going to start something with them. But for them to, it was.
So I'm going to jump on this right away. I will jump on this right away. So I'm completely fine with Baltimore doing that after the pick. Tennessee did it earlier in the season. I don't know what the reason was in that Week 11 game that they were doing that, but Mike Vrabel and John Harbaugh had some words about that. They were fine shaking hands after that Week 11 game. Seemed to be all and done, but it seems that Baltimore's side has not forgotten about that. They are now 1-2 against the Titans in these three important games that they played the last couple of years, and there is some bad blood there. I don't know if I understand, or I should say this. I understand where Lamar Jackson is coming through, going off the field and everything. Not the decision I would have made. I think sportsmanship is something that, especially in this time of age right now, needs to be something showed at least in the NFL. But I don't mind this. Aside from the Miami-Cincinnati game where there were a ton of ejections earlier this season, we really haven't had this type of rivalry in a little bit in the NFL. And I'm kind of all for it, not going to lie. I think this is something that, even though it's a little bit of animosity on both sides, but Baltimore was able to get their punch in. Tennessee took it, and they're going to roll with it. They're pretty happy with their 2 wins against this Baltimore team, but this is something that I kind of like out of the NFL. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is sort of a tit for tat kind of thing. If Tennessee's going to do it in Baltimore, Baltimore's going to do it in Tennessee. And if Tennessee's going to complain about it, grow up. I mean, if you're going to do it to them, you should expect the same thing back. I mean, it sounds like a children's game at this point, I guess. But going along with the sportsmanship thing, I don't know if I agree with the whole running off of the field to avoid any bad blood. At this point, I mean, what Ben said, just kind of where the world is at this point, it's best to just go out and like shake hands. Like even what you do, you know, just show some sort of respect for the team, I guess.
They probably knew that Tennessee was going to have something for them if they stayed, though.
Oh yeah, I agree. There definitely was some sort of bad blood or something to be expected at the end of the game, but at that point, I think some sort of sportsmanship or just even like a, hey, like good game, like nice job.
Right.
Like,
And this applies to everyone, even the self-proclaimed GOAT TB12. We're looking at you versus the Rams versus the Bears. We're looking at you.
Yep, agreed.
This reminds me of when it was shown in The Last Dance, Pistons versus the Bulls, and Isaiah Thomas just walked off, even though in that case he lost. But yeah. Let's move right along, though. So the next game that day on Sunday, Saints beating Chicago 21-9. Now, this game was pretty much a joke, to say the least. So the Bears defense showed up for the first half, we can say, because it was only 7-3 that they were down. But the big thing that I saw was Mitchell Trubisky needs to go, and he couldn't. I honestly don't remember. I don't think they got past midfield. Their offense was atrocious, and the only chance they had to score was that wide open drop in the end zone.
Yeah, so they did score that one time at the very end of the game, but at that point, the Saints didn't really care. They had a sizable lead to pretty much do nothing about that at the end. If we're just looking at the stat line, Trubisky didn't play horrible, but like Reed said, the scheme there in Chicago is just not working at all. They need a different answer. I don't think Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky is the answer. I think they both need to go. They need a clean slate. They need someone that can come in and provide some sort of solid play with the weapons they have. And they need to take a very serious look at wide receiver right now to specify some sort of position. I think David Montgomery's solid. He'll be the guy. But Allen Robinson, if you want a solid wide receiver, re-sign him. But I don't see Allen Robinson coming back. So you need someone to help out a quarterback if you're going to bring him in. So a lot of questions to be answered in Chicago on the offensive side of the ball. And right now, after this season, based on what I see, I don't see him being a playoff contender.
Yeah,
too big. Hold on a second. Playoff contender, they only got in because the Rams won. But yeah, they didn't deserve. Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying. I think that two big takeaways from this game, and I'll go with the first one first because I barely heard this being talked about as well. So Darnell Mooney was a rookie wide receiver that they've had pretty much the entire season. He was not able to play in this playoff game, and instead Javon Wims was the wide receiver off the practice squad to replace him. Darnell Mooney was mainly their deep ball guy. He was the number 2 target behind Allen Robinson there because Anthony Miller has been so inconsistent in his 3 years in the NFL with the Bears. But you could see without a second real solid guy for Trubisky, he was not able to move the chains very much. David Montgomery was kind of forced to do a little bit too much than what he's been providing for them. I know he's had heavier workloads of recent games, and this one was kind of light, but the Saints defense, keep in mind, is one of the best run games in the league, so they kind of had to beat him in the air, and Trubisky was not doing it. But to talk about Trubisky now, I think the situation is not that Trubisky isn't a quarterback that can win or even win in the playoffs, but I think it's a situation where Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky don't work. I think it's the head coach and the quarterback that don't work. So it's one of the situations where if you want to get rid of Trubisky, that works. But if you want to bring back Mitchell Trubisky, then you should not be bringing back Matt Nagy as your head coach. I know he went off of calling play calls near the end of the season, and they were able to thrive without it. But I still think that there's animosity there between the two, and I don't think they're a good fit. So if the Bears do want to stick with Matt Nagy as their head coach, Trubisky's got to go. And if they want to stick with Trubisky, Nagy's got to go.
I think from what it sounds like, they're going to be staying with Nagy, and then they're going to be getting rid of Trubisky. But because what I was going to say was there's question marks about Nagy and Pace's future in Chicago. But I would say they got you into the playoffs. I wouldn't be rushing to get rid of Matt Nagy right now. That's just me. I think Trubisky, he's had a couple of years now where he had I think it was his first year was good, but then ever since then he's just been less than average, I would say. But
I hear that, but it's a similar situation to what we've been saying about Sam Darnold and Adam Gase over the past couple of years. I know Adam Gase is probably a much worse head coach on paper than Matt Nagy is, but it's just a situation where the head coach and the quarterback don't work. And we've been giving Sam Darnold so many chances.
The Sam Darnold thing also, though, Sam Darnold had no weapons to throw to this year.
That's true, but in the scheme that the Bears have been running, Allen Robinson, aside from a few games where he's gone over double-digit targets, has kind of been underutilized until the second half of the games, if you're watching close, because until the last couple drives, he was only targeted once or twice for I want to say an 8-yard catch or something. They were using Wims and Montgomery a lot, not really targeting him. Same with Jimmy Graham until that touchdown catch that he had in the end zone to end the game. He did not have a single target in the game. They were going to Cole Kmet instead.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Ben here. Personally, I see this very similar as well to Darnold and Gase. Obviously, completely different scenario. Darnold didn't have any weapons to throw to. Gase, horrible coach. We'll just say that at the least. But it's just a scenario where Nagy's scheme and Trubisky's style just don't match, and it just doesn't click at all. I mean, I like Nagy as a coach. I think he has a lot of good ideas to bring to the table. I think he's probably the main reason, along with some of the defensive line pieces, why Chicago was even a contender to begin with and why they even had a chance to make the playoffs. But if they even want to progress moving forward, I think Trubisky is not the answer. I don't think Foles is the answer. I think they need to start new and find someone that, Nagy, pretty much matches with, and the scheme and his play style will work together.
Yeah, I think you're going to wind up seeing Trubisky being the fall guy here in the Windy City. But let's go to, because that's the Sunday night game on Sunday. So this was a shocker. And this I would say, goes ahead of the Rams-Seahawks game. But the Browns going into their big brother in Pittsburgh, Steelers, and beating them 48-37. So to be up 28-0 after the first quarter, and then 35-7 at the half. First, just right from the start, the first snap of the game goes right into the end zone. Right from there, Pittsburgh looks like they should have not even just shown up at that point, because it went right down from there. I mean, it got closer into the second half, and I was getting some flashbacks of the Falcons-Patriots Super Bowl at that point. But for Pittsburgh's point of view here, their offense was getting completely shut down here. Ben Roethlisberger looks, I would say he's going to retire, in my opinion. And their defense just, I mean, they didn't have their head coach, which was a big thing for Cleveland, and yet, which was a big point of their offensive play calling, and they let Baker Mayfield just throw right down the field.
To me, I'm just gonna go right into this. This game frustrates me in the entirety. This whole game, I blame on Randy Fichtner right now, their offensive coordinator. I blame the entirety on this game. The sole reason why I think so is because his play calling was horrible. You cannot rely on Ben Roethlisberger to do all sorts of dump passes and expect your wide receivers to run for 12 yards per reception. It's impossible, especially with Cleveland's defense coming up with that line. It's impossible to do. So I think they need to fire Fichtner right away and find someone that can manage Big Ben with the deep ball. I don't think
Ben will be back.
He's already said he's going to come back for a year. He's already told sources he's going to play another year. But I do not like Randy Fichtner at all. His play calling has not been good. They need to readdress the offensive line and find some new pieces to help it with the run game, because that was an issue all season. Just this offense needs to take a look at what they have and just redevelop a new scheme that Big Ben can work with, because from what I saw at the end of the season and in this game, no bueno.
I completely hear Brett on that. I would blame more of the lack of run game, because James Conner and Benny Snell have been pretty inconsistent all year. So that's kind of where the offense was kind of forced to be. I know Big Ben, aside from a few deep balls, touchdowns to Chase Claypool, they really haven't been a deep ball team the majority of the year, and you can even look back to last year. So I can understand where Brett's coming from firing Fichtner, but this is just an explanation of pure cockiness on the Pittsburgh Steelers' part. They were completely bashing the Browns all week, no expectations to come from the Browns. And I don't mind a little bit of trash talking, but you got to back it up if you're going to talk this much. And they are not backing up. You can even look to Chase Claypool the other day saying that, oh yeah, they destroyed us a little bit, but they're going to get destroyed in Arrowhead, so who cares? Wouldn't you care? Wouldn't you want to not be the team that gets destroyed and be like, oh yeah, that team's going to get destroyed by an even better team? So you're the third worst team in that situation? Yeah, no bueno.
Yeah, that whole thing was a joke. I mean, first of all, Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be a free agent. If I'm Pittsburgh, I don't want to go near him after what he did. And also, first of all, I don't know what any team would do that after he literally set a fire under them. And that was their whole motivation. You can't do that to another team. They're going to use that as motivation to go in there and beat you, and that's exactly what happens. And then, Chase Claypool saying that, well, they're going to get destroyed by Kansas City. Like, you're the one that's watching from home on the couch. You're not staying in the playoffs. Like, you should not be talking anymore. Yet you shouldn't have been talking during that week leading up to the game versus Pittsburgh. But at this point anyway, like, just be quiet.
Yeah, for a team that started out so hot, they have a lot of issues coming into the offseason. I know they had, I would say, no issues on defense because they're going to get a lot of pieces back. They lost a lot of pieces throughout the entirety of the regular season, but they need to shore up the running game, whether they draft running back in this class. I don't think they're going to be re-signing James Conner. I don't think he's the three down back that they usually like to have in Pittsburgh. And the situation with Big Ben, I don't know what that's going to be. If he is going to be coming back, like Brett said, I think there needs to be some changes, and maybe firing the offensive coordinator is a step in the right direction. But Mike Tomlin, being the head coach there, he has been a very good head coach in the regular season, but he shows yet again that sometimes he struggles to get the best out of his players in a big game like this. And I don't think he's going to get fired or anything, but I still think we need to see a little bit more from him as a head coach in these big games like this to give him a better rep.
So I'm going to say two things. First of all, if I'm the Steelers, I would not want – first of all, if I'm Ben Roethlisberger, obviously it makes sense. He said all along he never really plans to retire. He never does. But if I'm the Steelers, I would probably want to move on because from what I've seen from Ben Roethlisberger the past couple of years, he just doesn't look like the same quarterback. He doesn't look like the same guy that can get out of pressure, and just I just don't see Ben Roethlisberger the same prime Ben Roethlisberger. I think he's way past his time there.
I also agree. He hasn't been the same the past couple of years. He kind of looks like a shell of himself, to be honest with you. Even if they do consider like bringing Ben Roethlisberger back next season, I would seriously consider drafting a quarterback right now in this year's draft. Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges are not the answer at all. Looking at Mason Rudolph and just talking to a few other people.
Or just kick the tires on like Sam Darnold or something. Like just something you need something.
Yeah, I agree. Trade for someone, who hasn't been successful but is still young and could be developed in a proper system. I mean, Josh Rosen's being developed in Tampa Bay right now. We don't know
if he's on the practice squad.
He's pretty much there, but we'll see if he even does something. Sam Darnold, another possible option to trade for if the Jets decide to move in another direction. But if I'm the Steelers, I'd consider drafting or trading for a quarterback to back up Big Ben if he decides to come back, because if you just let this drag on and you let Mason Rudolph be the starter after Ben, they're in some serious trouble.
No. One other thing I want to just mention, though, staying on that game, because the one thing that I saw when Pittsburgh was making their comeback late in the second half, the start of the fourth quarter for Mike Tomlin so he had it 4th and 1 at basically at their own 46 towards midfield. At that point, you're down 35-23. Your offense can't stop, or has had a whole boatload of trouble stopping Cleveland's offense this whole game. I would have gone for it there. I think at that point when he punted, they basically had no shot. That was the deciding factor there, because you give the ball back to Cleveland, and they let Nick Chubb score, and then that pretty much sealed it up there. I mean, if you would have gone for it, and then for me personally, I would have gone for it. 4th and 1, go for it, and you score there. You're putting the more pressure on, because the momentum at that point was in Pittsburgh's favor with the amount of times they were scoring there. So at that point, to just give it back to Cleveland, it made no sense to me at all.
I also agree here. Looking at that punt and that 4th down situation, I was really confused in what Tomlin was doing. If, like you said, Reed, this is pretty much a whole situation of momentum. Pittsburgh had the momentum going in. They had the chance to come back. They had the potential to come back and even do something here, but Mike Tomlin decided to punt. I disagree with that. You go for it there on 4th down and try to rely on your running backs to try to make a stop. Even just a fullback give to Derek Watt and see if you can just punch in 1 or 2 yards for the first down. Could have been easily managed, but just punting right there, you give the momentum right back to Cleveland, and that pretty much just sealed the deal. Doesn't make sense to me at all, but you can't really control it.
Okay, Ben, do you want to comment on that or just?
No, I think you guys pretty much covered it.
All right. So then let's just move on for quick note, Cleveland's first playoff victory since 1994 against the Patriots. And oh, by the way, Bill Belichick was the Cleveland head coach, and they went up against Bill Parcells in New England at that time. But looking ahead to next weekend's divisional round, let's start with the Browns going into Kansas City here. So I still am going to take Kansas City here. I still believe their offense is too explosive here. And by the way, I understand Cleveland went into Pittsburgh and all, but let's face it, Pittsburgh just, as the second half of the season went on, just kind of collapsed and wasn't a good team. But if I'm looking at here for Cleveland's sake, they basically let Pittsburgh into this game and almost blew it, honestly. So I don't see how they're going to be able to keep up with Kansas City, and how they're going to be able to keep up in a shootout on the offensive side.
Mm-hmm. I also agree with this statement. Cleveland can't rely on the run game at this point into the season now. Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb can't be the only answer. They have to throw the ball, because Kansas City's whole offense is basically based on spreading out the ball, basically driving 10, 20 yards per down, and just manhandling defenses through their weapons. And if you're just going to rely on the run game this entire time, you're not going to be able to compete with that sort of high-powered offense that Andy Reid has going with Eric Bieniemy. So to me, Cleveland has to find a new way to drive the ball downfield and rely on their weapons that they acquired in the offseason. Austin Hooper, prime example. Haven't really used him all season. You need to rely on him in this game. Harrison Bryant, same thing. Jarvis Landry. You need to rely on these guys now to go back and forth with Kansas City if they want any remote shot at winning this game.
So before I go into on this, I am going to preface, I am picking Kansas City. However, it's like a 51-49 for me. I think Cleveland has just a good of a chance to come into Arrowhead and beat them. I think it's a very similar situation to what happened this week. I think it's a little bit different just because Kansas City does have a repertoire over the last couple of years that they are completely built for the playoffs. They show up. They do not disappoint. You could point to the late lead that they did have to take in the Super Bowl, but they show up in the playoffs. But let's talk about Cleveland just a little bit. So I'm going to address the points brought up. So the running game, you have to be less reliant on it. That is true, but you need to have a running game in the playoffs. I think we've seen the last few years in the Super Bowl that teams that get to the Super Bowl have a really good running game. Look at San Francisco last year. Look at the Patriots the past few years with Sony Michel, and they've had numerous guys coming in, a good rotation of running backs. Todd Gurley with the Rams, et cetera, et cetera. Chubb and Hunt are probably the best duo for running backs in the league. Maybe Jonathan Taylor and Hines are getting close there, but those two are the guys. But you talk about the passing weapons and everything. Donovan Peoples-Jones is someone that really hasn't been talked about a lot this year, but he has been a really good rookie wide receiver for them. Probably one of their best deep ball threats. I don't think Landry is that type of guy, but Peoples-Jones, especially in that Titans game, really showed that he is able to get the separation there on bad secondaries and everything. And I don't know, it's Landry and Hooper are two good targets as well. They're going to, obviously without OBJ, that's a big miss for them. But I don't know. I think on the offensive side of things, I'm not too worried. We have to realize that Kevin Stefanski is going to be back for this game. The only real concern I have for the Browns is their lack of secondary. I know Denzel Ward's going to be out for this game, or likely to be because of COVID. If he's back, that's a big help. But their secondary is a bit of a struggle, and Tyreek Hill is able to kind of just expose bad secondaries. Same with Travis Kelce and Sammy Watkins when they get wide open. So that's where I kind of lead Kansas City with the experience and with the lack of secondary experience on the Brown side of things. But I think it's really close. I think Kevin Stefanski has really set a culture in the Browns that is kind of transform them into what they've been over the last couple of years?
I think, first of all, on the Odell point, I think the Browns are clearly a much better football team without Odell. Because otherwise, you're just focused on Odell trying to get the ball and keep him happy. But I think they're much better without Odell. I just don't really see them sticking around with this kind of team. I think that Pittsburgh was just a pretty terrible team come the second half, and that kind of was exposed there. Let's move along, though. So the next game that on Saturday, that's going to be at 8:15. Ravens in Buffalo. So I'm going to have to go, because I know we were talking about Buffalo's defense earlier, and I'm going to have to go with, I think, Baltimore here, because I know we were talking about their defense of Buffalo earlier, but to not be able to stop the run there, I mean, just from watching it live, it was pretty concerning, and you're going to go up against Lamar Jackson, who's a threat at any point. I don't see how they're going to be able to contain him. And then Baltimore's defense is no joke on their side. So I just don't see how ultimately Buffalo's going to be able to stop Lamar Jackson.
I really don't know which way to go. This is the only game that I've noticed that I really don't know which side to pick here. I think this is going to be a legitimate dogfight. I think Lamar Jackson, like you said, Reed, is a serious threat both on the run, and I'm concerned if Buffalo can actually stop him. But then again, Josh Allen has proven he can piece some secondaries. He's beaten the Rams. He's held up against the Chiefs, which if he wins this game, he's going to have to compete with again. But I just don't know what's going to happen.
I'm still concerned about Lamar Jackson from the pocket. I'm still going to say that. I'm not 100% sure how well, the further you go deep into the playoffs, you're going to have to be able to throw the ball. And if we go back to that game, he pretty much, I mean, there was that one score that he had himself, which was a huge run. I'm still concerned about him from the pocket, but I just don't know if Buffalo's going to be able to contain him. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you actually just addressed my last point. I think Buffalo's primary concern here is keeping Lamar in the pocket and try to avoid him making any sort of movements on the run. I mean, if we look at last game, he had 136 yards on the ground, which for a quarterback is an anomaly. So just taking a look at this situation, Buffalo's going to have to try to keep Lamar contained any sort of way possible. But to me, I don't know which side to pick here. It's going to be back and forth. I think this is pretty even.
Well, you got to pick a side here, Brett.
If I'm going to pick one, personally, I go with Buffalo. I always go with the better team. I always go with the red hot team.
All right. So I'll be the tiebreaker here. Maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for a really good narrative, but I'm going to take Baltimore on the road dog on this one. I think Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh and that crew have really kind of energized themselves after that first playoff victory. They've been told so many times that, Lamar can't win in the playoffs all throughout this year. The big narrative, they're going to make it to the playoffs, but can Lamar win in the playoffs? Well, Lamar showed that he can win in the playoffs. He didn't even throw a passing touchdown. He threw for 170 and threw a pick, but he was able to run for over 150 yards on the ground. And they showed that they are going to be willing to let Lamar loose on the ground game. I know the 48-yard touchdown was a big part of that and everything, but they were willing to let him loose. And J.K. Dobbins wasn't a big factor, but Marquise Hollywood-Brown, like I mentioned before, and Mark Andrews have been really hot recently out of the pocket for Baltimore side. And I don't know, it's that concern of lack of a running game for Buffalo. And even though I do believe that Buffalo is the better team coming into this game, and I actually had them as my potential Super Bowl pick originally when the playoffs started, maybe it's just because I saw how close Indianapolis got to them. I'm not sure, but I am leaning towards Baltimore in this game.
The one thing I want to say, though, about Baltimore is the only concern with Baltimore, I would say, is, I mean, they run without a passing touchdown, like you said, from Lamar Jackson. But the only thing that I could say to go against that is that they were going against a Tennessee offense that only relied on their running game with Derrick Henry, basically, and really couldn't do anything there. Now you're going up against a Buffalo team with one of the best receivers, Stephon Diggs, and Josh Allen, who's not afraid to throw it at any point. That would be my only thing in response, but I'm still going to take the Ravens here.
I would say Tennessee was like 22nd in passing, but they still had A.J. Brown. Tannehill was a top 10 quarterback in terms of just his overall numbers this year. I think that even though they weren't passing a whole ton, not a bunch of pass volume, I think they are a double-way threat. I think Buffalo is much more of a passing threat, and they have completely flip-flopped from where we saw them last year. They were very much a run-heavy team, but have completely flipped into a pass-heavy team, and maybe that's because of Stephon Diggs, and it is, and the improvements Josh Allen has made, but I don't know. I want to preface this. I have complete faith in what Sean McDermott and Josh Allen are doing. I'm not going for Baltimore because I don't have faith in Josh Allen. I think it's just because I do have a little bit more faith in Lamar Jackson. There's something there that it's really clicking with me right now.
I think their defense also for Baltimore was just dominant. And you're going up against a young quarterback. I don't know how he's going to fare against that.
Yeah, I think if their corners, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and their young guys like Patrick Queen and Bowser are really able to showcase themselves as the playmakers that they were throughout the majority of the regular season, I think that's where I lean Baltimore, a little bit more faith in their defense, I guess.
I also agree that Baltimore secondary and their defense is going to give Buffalo a very tough time. That's why I think that Stephon Diggs isn't going to be as productive as we've seen in other games that they've played. I think if Buffalo wants to succeed in this game, you're going to see a lot of, receptions from guys that you don't normally see. Gabriel Davis, Dawson Knox, Devin Singletary is still going to be the scat back like you mentioned earlier, Ben. I think Cole Beasley's in for the game of his postseason career this upcoming game. If we take a look at his stat line, I'm a sucker for Cole Beasley. He should have been a Pro Bowl wide receiver. Almost 1,000 yards receiving on less than 100, receptions. I think he should have been a Pro Bowl wide receiver, in my opinion. I think Cole Beasley is easily going to, tear apart the slot that Baltimore has prepared right now. But I think Marlon Humphrey will fare a good matchup against Stephon Diggs. I think Marcus Peters will have a solid matchup as well. But I think Buffalo is going to have to rely on their younger guys to step up and try to find some open coverage in this really heavy Baltimore secondary.
Yeah, good call out on Gabriel Davis. I'd throw in even Isaiah McKenzie. He had 3 touchdowns against Miami in that Week 17 game. And John Brown as well. He's missed the majority of the season, but remember, he was their number 1 wide receiver last year, even before Diggs was there, and Beasley was the number 2.
Yeah. This is going to be one of the top games of the weekend. But let's go on to the next one. So this is going to be on Fox. So Rams up in Green Bay at the Packers. And actually what I mentioned from the last podcast video, but it's important now to say that the state of Wisconsin will be allowing the Packers to have 6,000 fans in attendance for this game. But I know, by the way, I believe the high for that game is going to be like in the 20s with a low in the teens. But so going off of that, obviously Green Bay has the advantage with a home field and the weather and some fans in attendance. But I'm going to have to go with the Packers here. I understand that the Rams have like a number 1 defense with Aaron Donald, assuming if he does play too. But you're going up against Aaron Rodgers, who's either him or Mahomes will probably be the MVP. And by the way, you're going from LA, which is probably like 70 degrees plus, to Lambeau below freezing. An LA team to go into a climate like that, I don't see that working, specifically with there's still some uncertainty at their quarterback position of play. I just don't see how the Rams are going to be able to keep up.
I'm also taking the Packers in this game. I completely agree with you, Reed, that going from dome stabilized climate conditions in an LA environment, even outside the dome in the 70s, and then going into Lambeau Field where it's below freezing and you're pretty much just looking all stiff out there. I don't see, even with the best coaching in the NFL, I don't see the Rams winning this game. I think experience in this type of climate and just knowing how to deal with Lambeau conditions is going to be the biggest factor in this game. And that's why I think Aaron Rodgers is going to piece this Rams secondary apart. He's the king of free plays. I think he's going to take advantage of hard counts here. I'm going to take the Packers cut and dry here.
Yeah, 100%. This is the one game where I was like, completely go Pack go on this one. Nothing against the Rams, but especially hearing that the weather is going to be in the 20s, and it might maybe if we get lucky, we get a little bit of snow there. But Green Bay being at home, I can't go against Aaron Rodgers. One thing I will be interested to see about Green Bay is how they will look without David Bakhtiari there. It's going to be, I believe, their second or third game without him there. Just want to see how the O-line holds up, how Rodgers is able to be protected by that team and everything. I think that's going to be a big narrative looking into if they're going to play teams like the Bucs, like the Saints that have decent pass rush or quarterback rush, I should say. But yeah, I'm going to take the Packers here. Nothing against the Rams, but it doesn't help when three of your biggest pieces, Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald, all are questionable in this game. I never go with injured teams. That's not really my mojo there. I think if the Rams were fully healthy.
And both of them were average at best.
Yeah, I think just in the narrative here, if the Rams were healthy, definitely would have been a better game. They were one of the better teams when everything was going their way and everything. But I'm just going to stay with the Packers here. Interested to see how the Green Bay defense does hold up, though, and the O-line without Bakhtiari there.
All right, so we're all in agreement there. Let's move right along then, because this next one is going to be the game of the weekend. Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady going into New Orleans to play Drew Brees. So Saints beat Tampa Bay both times by double digits when they met each other in the regular season. I understand there's this whole narrative you can't go against Tom Brady in the playoffs, but that was in New England. That was a completely different dynamic with how the team was made up with Belichick and all. I will have to go with New Orleans here. I think it's going to be a shootout. Although what I saw in that first half for Chicago to not only have 7 points was pretty pathetic. But the fact that, first of all, they just beat them both times they met, and their defense for Tampa Bay couldn't even stop a Washington football team and made it close. That's pretty concerning. And you're going to go up against a future Hall of Famer. Oh, by the way, you're going to be on the road. Oh, by the way, I'm pretty sure the state of Louisiana is allowing fans. And we know how that home field can affect a team come the playoff time in New Orleans. I have to go with the Saints here.
You're muted.
Dang, I guess this is the story of today. So I'm also going with New Orleans here. Seeing the conditions of this game, state of Louisiana is allowing fans, dome-based environment. Typically, there's a narrative that if you're in New Orleans, it's going to be a shootout. I can't go against the Saints here. Even if Tom Brady's playing at Tampa Bay, seeing how this young secondary, who their number one cornerback right now is Carlton Davis, against a healthy Michael Thomas, I just don't see it happening. I think Michael Thomas is going to have a pretty good game in this scenario. I think you're going to see a little bit of Jared Cook here in some scenario situations. Alvin Kamara is healthy once again. You have Latavius Murray at red zone situations. I'm going to go with New Orleans. I can't bet against them, against this Tampa Bay defense who couldn't even secure a win against Washington towards the end of the game. I think New Orleans is the favorite.
All right, so just based on history this season, New Orleans 2-0. Like I mentioned before, the first game was a little close, but some crucial picks by Brady favored New Orleans in that game. Second game, New Orleans completely dominated them on both sides of the ball. It was Antonio Brown's first game. He did near nothing. And this was out without Michael Thomas there. And this was before Breeze was injured and everything, so keep that in mind and everything. But I'm going to have to go with the Bucs. I have been completely anti-Bucs the entire second half of the season. And it's because I don't know if there's something wrong with the scheme that they're running in the offense there in Tampa, and I don't really have confidence in their secondary. But I actually have more concerns about the Saints. I think there is a clear concern that aside from Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, who else do you go to there? I know that Alvin Kamara has been very successful on the ground game as of late, but he's shown a little bit of inconsistency there in his career. He is much more reliant on his involvement in the pass game, and he's a great player. Just a point that I'm bringing up. Michael Thomas, he's coming off a high ankle sprain. This is an injury that kind of lingers throughout the season. It's going to be something that he's probably rehabbing when he gets back in the offseason and everything. And he had 3 weeks to heal from that. That's good and great. He's not 100%. I think that's a fact to be made. Drew Brees, he is not 100%. His ribs, he had 12 broken ribs and injured in his chest area, clavicle area. That's still something to be concerned about. And he did not look great against the Bears. I think it's a very important point to be made that deep into the third quarter of this Bears-Saints game, it was 7-3. The Bears were making very little movement on their side of the offense, and the Saints were doing just as little. I think you could say that the Bears defense is good and everything, but they've been middle of the pack this entire season. Tampa's defense is worse, but Tampa's offense is much better. The opportunities that the Saints defense gave Mitchell Trubisky, he didn't take advantage of. But do you think Tom Brady and Bruce Arians and all the weapons that he has aren't going to take advantage? I know they're going to be without Ronald Jones with his finger injury, but Leonard Fournette, as terrible as he's been an entire year, he put up almost 100 rushing yards against a pretty good run defense in the football team. There's concerns with the secondary there in Tampa, but I don't know. I'm going to go with the Bucs here. I for this game alone, I think they have the better matchup here. And I don't know. They're 0-2 this year, but I think they're going to flip the script and, similar to the Ravens, make it a 1-2 script.
Yeah, I just don't see I understand the weapons are there and all, but I don't think I think first of all, I think New Orleans is going to have plenty of options on the offensive side of the ball, and I just don't see Tampa's defense.
I'll ask a simple question here. Before Sunday, did any of you know who Deontay Harris is?
No. What?
Jared Cook was barely utilized. Emmanuel Sanders, I think, had like 1 or 2 targets, and they were really short dump-offs, very similar to how they use Kamara. I don't know. It's something to keep in mind for sure.
I understand Ben's argument. I think it's very solid. Like, Tampa Bay definitely, in my opinion, has more weapons to play out the ball. But to me, just looking at the comparison of defenses, I think New Orleans has the more solid defense to be consistent. I think there's a lot more questions in Tampa Bay as opposed to New Orleans, and that's why I'm taking New Orleans in this situation. But if they both had the same defense and the same capabilities, I'd probably go Tampa Bay. But that's obviously not the case here, so I'm taking New Orleans.
Oh, yeah, I'll preface this. I completely get where you guys are going with New Orleans. There's almost all this evidence on the New Orleans side to go with New Orleans. But I don't know. I'm all in favor of changing the narrative a little bit, and I do feel like I haven't even mentioned Tom Brady. Like, Tom Brady is a factor in this versus Drew Brees here. Drew Brees has been very iffy this entire year, and Tom Brady threw 40 touchdowns. I know he had some interception issues earlier in the year, but I haven't even mentioned their weapons, which they have good weapons.
Tom Brady is the main factor here, and the only reason you're okay. First of all, Tom Brady is the main factor here, and if he wasn't,
for my argument, it is not the main argument. I think there's more concerns on the Saints side.
If Tom Brady wasn't there, you think they still have a shot?
I mean, it depends on who the quarterback is. It's always dependent on the quarterback. Quarterback is one of the most important positions, especially in the playoffs.
There you go. Okay. All right, let's move along then. So there's 2 quick other stories that have come out the past couple of days that have caught some fire here. Deshaun Watson's reportedly been unhappy with the situation in Houston, basically saying that the owner, McNair, did not consult or listen to his suggestions for GM candidates when they hired Nick Caserio from the Patriots. And, oh, by the way, he's also reportedly upset sounds like that because they didn't interview Eric Bieniemy from the Chiefs for their head coaching opening. So the question here is, should Watson want out? And should the Texans trade him? So I'll just quickly start here. Should he want out on his part, Watson's side? I could make a legitimate case. Yes, I think it makes sense for him to want out after this situation with the GM and not being listened to or consulted. Or, I mean, technically, as a quarterback, you're not the one making the choice, but you should at least be getting heard from, and getting your. That's just my opinion. And then the other thing is, before this happened, last offseason, trading DeAndre Hopkins, your top target, that also obviously has put him upset. And as Adam Schefter reported about this, that put him, he was at a 2 of anger when that happened to now this offseason with the way this whole interview process has went to a 10. So I can totally understand him wanting out here. He hasn't said that yet, but that's the way I see that for him. For the Texans, you have to do all you can to get this fixed up before he either says it publicly that he wants out or he starts sitting out in training camp. Because if you get to that point, you're done. You have no shot to keep him there, because otherwise the locker room's just going to be a mess.
So I'm going to first off and say this. Does Deshaun Watson have a right to want out? Yes. Every quarterback has the right to want out of a team. However, this is just my personal opinion. Even if the GM and owner promised that they would have some sort of say in this conversation, it's their decision to make final. And I personally don't think Deshaun Watson should be a huge factor. This is the owner's decision to hire a general manager who makes the team and helps Deshaun Watson create a legacy in Houston. Regardless if he makes a promise or not, I just don't see how Deshaun Watson becomes a huge factor in this decision. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Draft Day. It was made back a couple years ago. Reminds me of the Brian Drew situation in Cleveland. You know, even though you're the stud quarterback and you want to say in what's going on in this draft, it's the general manager's decision final. It's not your decision. So to my personal opinion, Deshaun Watson has the right to be angry at what's going on, but this is the owner's decision.
I think.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, let me just say this. I think I agree that the owner and they all have final say of who gets what. I mean, Deshaun Watson isn't having final say over that, but from what it sounded like from when the story came out was that he's not getting like even listened to, because I mean, first of all, the Eric Bieniemy thing, like, you're not getting like anything, or from what it sounds like, from the way I saw the story was that you're not getting told pretty much like anything of what's going on, or you're basically just getting ignored and not getting an explanation. That's the way it sounded like. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Brett brought up a pretty good comparison there. I like the draft day comparison. The two that I were thinking of was literally just any superstar in the NBA, and then the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers situation in 2004. I think that's been like one of the only few times that someone really like orchestrated themselves to go somewhere in the NFL. But I think the NBA comparison is a little bit better. I think the NBA is not the NFL. It's harder for a superstar in the NFL to kind of force themselves out of a trade here. But I think Deshaun Watson, if he like really wants to get out of Houston, is able to do it. I think it would be a tough sell for Houston just to keep him in there. Like, I don't know how Deshaun stays. Like, this situation is getting worse and worse from the end of the past off season with the Hopkins trade and everything. Them ownership just blatantly lying to him. That has been a clear fact stated from Watson's side, that he's been lied to on numerous occasions. And that is just that just ruins a relationship. We look at the Philly situation, like no lying was there, but a relationship was ruined. We mentioned the Chicago situation with Trubisky and Nagy and stuff. I think this situation is the worst of them all. And Watson has been lied to. He's pretty much just a lone guy left there with J.J. Watt pretty much saying that, yeah, I want to leave too. So if Watson's smart, he's going to leave before the ship falls in on itself. And I think brought up in the report from Schefter, and there have been numerous links to Miami possibly being interested there with Tua Tagovailoa and some of their first rounders coming back to Houston. I think that would be an amazing fit if that was to happen. I think Miami would be willing to give up some of their first round capital to get a guy like Watson, who is a top 5 quarterback in the league by no doubt. If I'll say this just for 2020's sake, if he was on a somewhat significant team, he would have been the MVP conversation. His numbers were that good, but just because the Houston Texans stunk for pretty much the entire season, he got no representation, but his numbers were really good this year. And Deshaun Watson is a phenomenal talent. He is a generational talent. If Miami got him, that would be unbelievable. And Reed, I'll let you talk on this because I know you wanted to explain this a little bit further.
Well, with the Miami situation, I think if he goes to Miami, the question here is, if you're Miami, do you give up on Tua that quickly? The question here is, I mean, we've seen this kind of happen in the NFL already before with Josh Rosen with the Cardinals, and then they wound up getting a stud in the draft from Kyler Murray. So it wouldn't surprise me if they moved on from him that quickly, but that's a decision that the Dolphins have to consider if that's legitimately here to happen. The other thing to consider here, though, is that Deshaun Watson, first of all, he hasn't been back from vacation, and they haven't talked since really then, so you still have to wait for that. But he has a no-trade clause through 2020. First of all, he has a huge extension of $156 million and a no-trade clause through 2025. So that's a big chunk of money that you would be taking on if you're a team. And he has to say of where he wants to go. So it sounds like it's leaking from his agent that Miami would be a destination he would want. The one thing I'm going to say about that is if he does wind up going to Miami, that is going to be absolutely hilarious, considering that the Jets have a bunch of draft picks that they can offer to Houston, plus a future quarterback. And then he winds up going to Miami, which is the same division. That would be absolutely hilarious, in my opinion. But the other team that I would think, at least because we honestly don't know what teams he has on his list besides Miami. It sounds like right now, because he runs the ship of where he can go right now, if this is to happen. The Jets obviously is another team that has a boatload of draft picks that they can offer along with Sam Darnold between the number 2 and then Seattle's pick and next year's with Darnold. But then after that, I mean, we know that there's Miami. I don't know what other team would have enough to convince Houston or Watson on that matter, if he even wants to go there. That's the other question.
So I'm going to go ahead and say this. Speaking of the market, I'm going to go New England here.
What are you giving up?
What are you giving up? I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, they have the cap to play with. Deshaun Watson, yes, he has $156 million to deal with. However, New England has a lot of cap room to deal with, considering the weapons that they have right now are not in the biggest of deals. They also have Stephon Gilmore, a former defensive player of the year that you can give up. And they're pretty much hurting for secondary right now in Houston. So I would consider the possibility of trading away someone like Jarrett Stidham, or trade away Cam Newton, or someone.
I know he's a free agent, but
he's a free agent. I'm just saying this scenario. Trade someone away with Stephon Gilmore and maybe 2 future first-round picks for Deshaun Watson, because they have the money to play with. In this case, I think just considering the market right now and where New England is, I think Deshaun Watson would be a fantastic fit with Bill Belichick in New England. If they manage to score a couple weapons in the draft, New England's back in the race in the AFC East.
Okay, first of all, let's clean this up. First of all, Cam Newton's going to be a free agent.
He is a free agent. I was wrong on that. You are correct on that. I'm just saying, just a possible, even Jarrett Stidham.
I don't know what Houston would see that would convince them they would want to take on Jarrett Stidham from a guy that they're giving up who would have been an MVP candidate if they were a better team. That just doesn't really make sense to me. And then, I mean, you're giving up draft picks, but like, I don't see how that matches up against like a Jets offer, who has
I also there's a possibility. What if say this is just me going out of the ordinary here. There's also this possibility too. New England drafts a quarterback, trades it right away to Houston with another first-round pick in Stephon Gilmore with other cash considerations. There are a lot of possibilities Belichick has to play with. It's just a matter of does he pull the trigger, because I still see New England as a possibility. Miami is the best fit, and they have the capability to do so, but I don't discount New England here. They've pulled off moves like this before. I don't discount them doing it again.
Well, the other question that we also have to consider, which we don't even know, is would Watson approve of that? I mean,
Absolutely. I think so. With a 6-time Super Bowl champion head coach in Bill Belichick, an offensive coordinator who's proven that, he can succeed with a right system and a defense that has fared to be pretty successful in the past 5 or 6 years, I don't think Watson would disagree to going to New England with a great head coach. And seeing where he's coming from with a dismayed Bill O'Brien and now an ownership and general manager who seem to be often the same on different pages, I think it'd be okay.
okay, you're going to have to get a lot of weapons. I just think that the Jets are going to have, looking at it on paper right now, the Jets have the best offer, but we'll have to see what else he has. Go ahead then.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going to address your point about Tua with Miami. I think the Arizona situation with Rosen and Kyler is a little bit different because Watson is a proven guy in the NFL. Kyler was a little bit unproven, so the Cardinals were definitely taking a risk there. I think Miami would be taking little to no risk there. I understand they would have to take on. No. You were saying it was like a similar situation.
I was similar with Rosen because they already gave
Yeah.
up on him.
No, you're good. I think otherwise, like, there's no reason that I don't think Miami would be going after a quarterback in the draft because Tua did have mistakes and everything, but he showed flashes of being a good, solid quarterback in the NFL. I think this would be like the extreme scenario where they would be willing to give up on Tua to get Deshaun Watson, who is a proven commodity, a top 5 quarterback in the league. And they would be giving up a solid amount of capital and putting a lot of investment in there. But for a team that showed that they're a lot closer to winning than previously thought by most of the industry, I think they would be willing to do it. They might have to consider keeping one of their picks if they did want to go grab another receiving asset, unless they wanted to go on the free agency market and grab like a Allen Robinson, Will Fuller type of guy, which is still a possibility there, but it would be tougher with the cap situation. But yeah, I think Miami, like you both mentioned, is probably the best fit. Teams like the Jets, the Niners would be another fit that I could see there. The Patriots is a somewhat fit there. I guess the Colts, but I don't really see any interdivision stuff happening. But there are fits that do work. But I do think Miami is the most obvious fit and probably clear-cut fit.
Yeah, we're still gonna have to see what happens when Watson comes back from his vacation and talks with the owner, if he's able to get this relationship back together. But let's move on to the last story here, because actually it was just yesterday that this whole thing came out. The Eagles firing Doug Pederson. Was this the right move? First of all, let me just say this right off the bat. This was pretty clear and obvious that they're picking Carson Wentz over Doug Pederson because we knew that their relationship was already broken. So that's number one. It sounds like they had said that this has nothing to do with the Nate Sudfeld situation too, of what happened in week 17. I happen to disagree with that. I think the locker room wouldn't have been too pleased if he had come back. That's just my opinion. And then, so was it the right move? I would have to say yes, just because of what happened with Nate Sudfeld. I think you can't come back from that. That you ruined your locker room. You had one of your players saying that you always have to be going to play to win. And even though it's very possible, I don't know if this has come out publicly yet, but that the front office probably would have told him to just play Sudfeld in week 17. I just don't see how a head coach like that can come back and face that team again with a straight face.
I'm also on the idea that week 17 decision, not good. Do I think it was Pederson? I don't know. It's very possible, seeing the situation late in the season, that they were just playing for a higher draft pick in that case. Do I think Doug Pederson is a very talented coach? Absolutely. I think he has a great offensive mind, and I think he has the capabilities to bring a team to a Super Bowl, which he's already proven. However, seeing that he benched Wentz for Hurts and then he benched Hurts for Sudfeld, I don't know if he can look at the Eagles the same again. I don't think he could have done that. You already lost faith in pretty much most of your offense at that point. I think they need to reconsider a lot of options in Philadelphia, remanage the cap, because they're in some deep trouble in cap room. And now that Wentz is there, he's probably most likely going to stay in Philly once again. They really need to reconsider what's going on, because now you have Hurts you have to deal with Wentz. You have a big contract at Wentz that if you're going to trade him, you have to consider the dead cap. There's too many factors to consider in Philly. They're a hot mess, and I think firing Doug Pederson's the first step of sorting out all of the ridiculousness that's going on.
Yeah, I think even before the week 17 situation, and that just added on to it, I think Pederson needed to go. Even if they did want to keep Wentz, which I think I'm still up in the air on, because I do think that Jalen Hurts, even though it was a really small sample size, has shown a little bit of promise there to be somewhat of a kind of mobile quarterback, as we've seen Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson show over the past couple of years. It's again a small sample size, but he did prove that he could run the offense the way it was comprised at that moment in time. I think it's going to be a different looking team depending on whether they want to go after a wide receiver again in the draft class and what they do decision-wise for the rest of the team and front office-wise. But yeah, I think the Pederson move needed to happen. And the next big decision that they have to make is whether they want to keep Carson Wentz or not, whether he is, even if Hurts is their guy for the next year, 2022 or 21 to 22 season, if they want to keep Wentz around or if they're going to try and eat some of that contract and deal him.
I think they're going to wind up keeping Wentz as the starter. I think they chose Wentz over Pederson, and I don't think they're going to get rid of him. I mean, they said publicly, it sounds like they want to keep him there and try to fix him. So I think they're going to keep Wentz there. And also the contract, as you said, that's going to be pretty difficult to get rid of. The only other thing to mention here with Doug Pederson is Ian Rappaport had the report yesterday that Pederson was tired of being told what to do, which I think pretty much has to go with, I would think, going back to week 17 with Sudfeld. Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens to the Eagles. I mean, I've seen that they put in a request for the former Jets head coach Todd Bowles, and I think it's Robert the coordinator in San Francisco. Let me just say this to Todd Bowles: if he gets another head coaching job, that's a disaster. What happened with the Jets, I don't understand. And first of all, Todd Bowles, let's just say this: in a big market like New York, was a disaster and destroyed by the press every day. You're not going into any smaller market in Philadelphia if you go there. I think if Todd Bowles goes to Philly, or whoever team he goes to, is going to finish last in their division, straight up.
I also heavily agree with this. I think the whole thing with the Jets with Todd Bowles, he basically gave the keys to Adam Gase of a 1975 Ford station wagon, said, here, turn this into a Mercedes-Benz. Adam Gase, I think going into it, had no shot whatsoever, even though he's a horrible coach. But putting Todd Bowles into a market like Philly with that horrible cap situation, a quarterback disaster right now, what's going on between the three, and pretty much a defense that is kind of wishy-washy right now, I think it's going to be a disaster. I think Philly is going to be set up for failure. Robert Saleh could be an interesting selection, very defensive-minded, not so much offensive, so we need to hire a good coordinator in order to make it happen. But like you said, Todd Bowles goes there, no good.
Yeah, I think Todd Bowles should just stick where he is in Tampa. I think that's a pretty good fit for where he is right now, even though the Tampa defense has been too great. But yeah,
I
I don't
think,
know who's going to fit in with the Jets head coach spot.
well, he also interviewed in Detroit, which is also just laughable. But speaking of the Jets, um, the question now becomes, at least here in the New York market area, is should the Jets be going after him? Because right now the Jets have been interviewing a lot of coordinators, to say the least. And in my opinion, if you're the Jets, I don't think you should be going after coordinators. I feel like they've been going after coordinators a lot in their past head coaching searches, and they haven't really turned out to be that good. If you're the Jets, you need somebody that has experience and has had some success. And then I'm going to say this first, that while Doug Pederson was a failure this past season in Philadelphia, let's just not forget 3 years ago he went to the Super Bowl and won with a backup quarterback, Nick Foles. Granted, Nick Foles was a starter in year past before that, which I think people tend to leave out, and had success. But he had that where they won. Then he comes back the next year. They go to the playoffs and they go toe to toe in New Orleans with the Saints in the playoffs to go to the championship, which would have put them to the championship game. Point being that he won a Super Bowl and they had gone to multiple years with playoffs appearances. So the other thing to consider here with the Jets is Joe Douglas, the GM with the Jets, knows Doug Pederson from their time together in Philadelphia. So I guarantee he's going to get an interview with the Jets. I can't see the Jets going with another coordinator here. So unless you could think of another guy with experience, this might wind up being the guy for the Jets. This kind of reminds me, in my opinion, with what the Knicks did, hiring Tom Thibodeau, who was buddies with Leon Rose, which is how that kind of unfolded. But go ahead.
To me, I also think Doug Pederson could be the best fit. I think they need someone that can go in and create a culture immediately within the program, because let's face it, they have zero identity right now with what Adam Gase did. They need someone that can come in, create some sort of, winning identity and go in and play with poise. And I think Doug Pederson could potentially bring that. Like you mentioned, he has previous success going to the Super Bowl and then going toe-to-toe to New Orleans. Very successful part on Doug Pederson's side. He has a lot of work to do if he gets hired. Obviously, the defense needs a lot of work. They need weapons on offense. Rebuilding Sam Darnold's identity in New York is definitely probably the biggest factor in that scenario. If I want to consider someone else besides Pederson, I mentioned this before, I'm a big fan of Arthur Smith from Tennessee. I know coordinators might not be the best route in this scenario, but he's had success in turning around people's careers. Derrick Henry started off slow. Now he's a beast. Ryan Tannehill, not successful at all in Miami. Now he's pretty much successful in Tennessee from what we can say. I'm just going off a broad perspective, and based on the offense, I think he could be very ground-heavy successful in New York. The other possible name, Eric Bieniemy, he's been the biggest name this offseason. If they choose to hire him, it'd be a big success.
What about the Buffalo offensive coordinator who turned around, was able to work with Josh Allen?
You are right on that. Brian Dable could be a very good option as well. I'm just looking at guys that have turned around and made success in teams. And I think that's what the Jets need right now for Darnold in this offense that has pretty much been dull the entire 2021 season. I think Doug Pederson should be the best fit in this case right now with Joe Douglas. But there are other options, like I mentioned.
Yeah, I can understand where you guys are coming from. I think it's going to be a tough sell for Pederson to go from just a few years ago being a Super Bowl winning head coach to kind of coaching a team where their direction is kind of up in the air. I know that they have a bunch of picks to go ahead, but I think it's going to be a tough sell for Pederson to go to New York. I think that he would need to be assured that he would have a decent amount of control and levity in what he would be able to do up there. I do like the fit of Arthur Smith. I don't think guys like Brady, Joe Brady, or I guess Todd Bowles would fit into this as well. Are really great fits. They're more offensive and defensive minded would-be head coaches in their own respective. I think Robert Saleh is another guy that, even though he is a more defensive-minded guy, I think he's more well-balanced, being one of the Kyle Shanahan disciples there in San Francisco. But I think you guys are making good points. I think Pederson would need a decent amount of control, though, there to be able to go to New York, because he would be a culture-setting guy, at least in my opinion.
The other thing to consider here is, I mean, there's a lot of critics saying that he ruined Wentz or whatever, but if you go back in years before that, I mean, granted, he had, I believe it was Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator who, when Wentz, I believe it was his MVP, would have been MVP year if he hadn't gotten hurt. But beside that, he also had Nick Foles, who he had successful quarterbacks. So just because Carson Wentz, point being that Carson Wentz kind of had a down year, I don't think you can just look at that 1 year and say, oh, you can't work with Sam Darnold because look what he did with Carson Wentz. Because while he had other coordinators there, like Frank Reich, I just think that look at what happened with Nick Foles, a backup at that time of the season. So that's just another thought right off the top of my head. But it should be very interesting to see what happens to the Jets. I think that Pederson and Joe Douglas relationship will be a big point in that if they wind up, which I think will interview process. But that's all the time we have for you today here on Views from the Booth. For Brett Shaves and Ben Pope, I'm your host, Reed Becker, and join us next time on a new edition of Views from the Booth.